To start, okay? Okay, so hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to have you back here at the seminar and also to have Darcia Narvaez, Professor of Psychology Emerita at the University of Notre Dame. Darcia has been one of the world-leading figures in the discussion on moral development, and I mean, I won't go over her huge list of publications. She's written around 20 books, and if I'm missing some of them, it's because she's going fast. And several of these books have been receiving important awards. And among the questions, I mean, I list one of her virtues, if I may, is the virtue of being able to speak to scholars in so many different disciplines and bringing together different disciplines such as developmental psychology, neurobiology, anthropology, evolutionary psychology, and education science and moral philosophy as well. So today it's a great pleasure to have her here, and the title of her talk is, if I am right, the practical wisdom of a human nature raised according to human evolutionary history. So without any further ado, I'll leave the floor to you, Darcia.
Thank you so very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you, with all these austere colleagues. I'm not a philosopher, so it's a little nerve-wracking. So please forgive me if I step in potholes or step on toes. I hope you will guide me in my learning of your field as well, and integrating it into this bigger picture of transdisciplinary work that I do. I'm going to share my screen here. And I will be moving from with the PowerPoint, but then also reading. So depending. And the work that I'll be talking about is based on the chapter that I wrote for Doctors De Caro and Vacarezza, their volume on practical wisdom. So much of what I'm going to say is there. And so let's begin. Phronesis, or practical wisdom, is an idea often presumed to have emerged from the ancient Greeks, and thus discussions tend to focus on their views. Yet practical wisdom was not just the purview of ancient Greek thought, but was discussed among axial age philosophies. And it is apparent, though it's not written down, in ancestral style societies, which we can call non-civilized. And it's also apparent among First Nation peoples of the Americas, whose documentation we have since 1492. So the perspective here presented suggests that perhaps because of inadequate attention to these other traditions, there are gaps in most scholarly discussions of phronesis. The latter traditions include, so the ones I'm talking about that are missed, include two critical ingredients not typically attended to in discussions of ancient Greek traditions. One, the grounding of biosocial ecology of development, and two, the expansive imagination or worldview of transpersonal transrationality. Both are arguably fundamental, species-typical aspects for becoming and being human on a living planet, and for living a life that is good for one to live. So phronesis is characteristic of human living generally, answering the question, how does one live a good life? It integrates all the intelligences, applying what is needed in the situation. Interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence, that's socio-emotional intelligence, spatial and kinesthetic intelligence, logical, mathematical, even musical, linguistic, naturalistic, and spiritual. In fact, to stay alive, every creature must have prudence, sagaciously discerning what is safe or unsafe. And so practical wisdom is guiding every animal in what we decide to do now, tomorrow, or today. But for human beings, practical wisdom is broader and deeper. We make choices that can greatly affect many others, both human and other than human, at multiple levels, from quality of life that others experience, including future generations, disturbances of ecosystems, and even pandemics. We take actions that lead to various disasters like that. The critical aspects then here discussed may help explain how the dominant culture of the world, globalized capitalism, which is another form of colonialism, has become reasonable while at the same time destructive of habitat and life. When we discuss phronesis or practical wisdom, it is important to address appropriate features. To determine wise action by an organism, an animal, we must understand the animal we have in mind. What is its nature? What are its capacities? And these are what are foundational to action and wisdom of that animal. So I'm going to focus then on Philippa Foot's discussion based on Thompson about how one lives a good life. And it really begins with judging human beings. Philippa Foot suggested that to judge goodness generally, one must take into account the kind of organism being judged. For example, wise action for a fully functioning sea turtle would be quite different from that for a fully functioning human being. Each organism has characteristic features which are good for the creature to have, and that when missing, make the individual a defective member of the species. When discussing human beings, we must understand the nature of the human organism and its development. That's A. B, what qualities help the human organism lead a good life. And C, what kinds of actions and capacities make it a proper member of its species. Only after figuring those things out can we discuss practical wisdom. There are two correctives that I would like to suggest to Foot's framework for assessing wise action. One is biosociality. Humans do not emerge like eggs from a mother and live independently after exiting an eggshell as turtles do. Instead, humans are highly biosocial beings. Their biology is actually shaped by postnatal social experience, all the way down to neurobiological structures and function. Assessment of an individual's human's typicality, how typical they are of the species, involves then assessing the quality of their social milieu. What context in which they developed during childhood, when the neurobiological structures are highly shaped. And then number two, atypicality. Contemporary human beings hardly at all match up with the human beings that represent our natural history. We, contemporary human beings in our social milieus, are far from what will be described as species typical. Some argue that what modern humans exhibit represents evolutionary progress. By natural selection, they mean. But evolutionary change does not occur to such a vast degree on such a short time frame. We are still social mammals, a line that emerged around 30 million years ago with specific basic needs and ways to fulfill those needs. So it's not parsimonious to argue from an evolutionary change perspective of why we are so different today. Rather, it is more parsimonious to suggest that the developmental system for raising human beings has eroded, contributing to the distressed and dysregulated adults that populate and construct the ongoing destructiveness of the civilized world. And I speak mostly from the perspective of living in the United States, where so much self-destruction and other destructiveness is rooted. So with Foot's framework and these amendments to be integrated, let's apply her categories as she suggests. So the nature of the human organism and its development. What is the natural description or natural history of a human being? One cannot find this in the slice of weird societies, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, that are the kinds of subjects that are typically studied. Nor can we find this description in civilization generally, which represents only a segment of human beings living in the last 1% of human genus existence, which is about the last 10,000 years. Instead, it makes sense to examine those that represent the majority of human existence, nomadic foragers or small band hunter-gatherers, who live in the kind of society in which the human genus spent 99% of its life on the planet and who still exists today. And that's where we can gather the information about what they are like. We note then that a species' typical human life, which we see among extant small band hunter-gatherers, has characteristics like the following. They live in bands of 5 to 50 people of multiple ages. They have few possessions. They consume foods as they collect them. They're fiercely egalitarian. No one coerces anyone else. They are largely peaceable and spend most time in social leisure, enjoyable social leisure. Adult members of these communities tend to be generous, calm, highly communal, but also highly autonomous, very individualized. They are not tribal, making them suspicious of outgroups. Instead, they are much more open to difference, to finding the, to differentiate themselves from others, including the natural world. So contributing to these factors or these outcomes likely include the lifestyle that they provide the young. And what they do is they provide for basic needs. So the nature of the human organism and its development relies on this gap then. That's the focus that I want to emphasize is the two gaps. So to answer the question here, we need to look at what we're missing, which is the baselines for growing a human being. And first, we've got to look at the basic needs that we have. So we understand ourselves as animals, and we often understand that we need nourishment, of course, warmth, protection, and safety. And in the United States, a lot of parents think that's all really that you need. And that's the kind of scientists have said this as well in the past, the behaviorists, the psychoanalysts. But we know now, since John Bowlby and other neuroscientific researchers, that we are mammals who need lots of affection. We need play, social play. We need to feel included. So we are mammals who need that to grow well. We are also social mammals, which means that we need extensive bonding. We need a community that supports us, and we need to feel that social enjoyment with others, the social kind of cohesion. And after the early life, early experience, we build then, it takes us 3 decades to become an adult. Compared to, for example, bonobos or chimpanzees, they're adult by around age 8. It takes us many more years for our brains to be completely reaching adult levels for our bodies. So bodies take till around age 20, brains till about age 30. And during this time period, we also need our intersubjectivity with multiple adults. That means the sharing of communication and emotion, immersion in communal life, apprenticeship in adult activities, the stories and narratives about how we fit into life. We make meaning of our lives. If we don't get a good story, we're going to find a bad story, right? A negative identity with, but I won't go into that. And then we also need experiences of self-expansion, of moving beyond the ego, and then also healing practices that help us rebalance our health, our physiology, our psychology, and our relationships. So these basic needs then are fulfilled in these communities that I mentioned, the small band hunter-gatherers. And why are these so important? Why is it so important to pay attention to those basic needs, especially in early life? Well, we have extensive plastic mind, brain, body in those early years, and we get less plastic with age. We are more plastic than chimpanzees, so more epigenetic things are happening. Genes are being turned on or off by our experience, by being touched or not touched, for example. And there's a constant interaction between nature and nurture in every second. The baby is growing thousands of brain connections every minute. And so the baby is a different baby every 5 minutes. So it's important then to provide for their basic needs all the time, because you don't know what system you're affecting if you don't provide for those basic needs. So we're very dynamic. We are dynamic systems. So those early beginnings of any dynamic system has an effect on the trajectory of that system. So undercare in early life is going to lead to a different life for that individual than if their basic needs are fulfilled. So we are biosocial creatures, and that means that our biology is shaped by our social experience, and our social capacities that we develop are guided by how well our biology works. So there's this dynamic interdependence of having good relationships and support that then foster the kind of human being we become. Caregivers then are co-constructing the brain, they're co-constructing the personality, they're co-constructing how well that individual is going to get along with others, how intelligent they're going to be. And the things that are happening inside the brain are emotion, intelligence, cognitive intelligence. These are intertwined. The sense of self. Am I safe in the world? Am I a good person? Is this a good place to be? All those things are developed when we're pre-verbal in those first months and years of life. And part of that is the social worldview of believing that the world is a good place to be, that relationships are trustworthy, that you can find your way and what you need in the world. Or the opposite is you feel distrustful, that you're bad, that you're not going to get your needs met unless you fight, right? All the kinds of seeds of distress that we see, especially in the United States, are coming from, I believe, this undermining of early care. So human babies really need a womb with a view. We are born 18 months early compared to other animals. We look like fetuses in various ways until around that time. And so babies' needs have to be met, fulfilled, and kept calm in those, especially those 18 months, but also in the first years, because they're shaping how well the brain is going to work. So in my lab, we study the evolved nest. How do you meet the basic needs of young children? You provide them with the evolved nest. And this is the set of social and ecological circumstances that every animal has for their young. They're inherited through the tree of life through the course of evolution. This is one of many inheritances beyond genes that we have. Our set of practices is mostly the social mammalian nest, which is over 75 million years old. In this case, evolution has, so to speak, done the experiments. We can call these practices our original instructions for raising a human being. And it's really important to know that these are provided by a community of caregivers. Group motherhood is part of our heritage. We shifted away from being apes in the dominance hierarchy that you can see in chimpanzees, and we moved ourselves away from that when mothers bonded and coalesced together to raise a very caloric, needy big-brained offspring. And so there's the anthropologists are telling us now that our big brains, our big social brains, co-evolved with group motherhood, because the mother alone, if you're a chimpanzee, the mother alone can provide the calories needed for the chimpanzee brain, which is about 3 times smaller than the human brain. But a human mother cannot provide enough calories alone for our big hungry brain. So our evolution is to band together as a community and provide for all the children in that community, not just ones that you know are yours. So our evolved nest, the fancy term is evolved developmental niche, which we use in our academic papers, but evolved nest is our common way of saying it, has then 9 components here that we have identified in hunter-gatherer societies around the world. We've pulled out characteristics. There's probably others that could be identified, but these are the ones that are particularly important for early life. And actually every one of these, except for the first 2, we need all throughout our lives in order to stay healthy and to stay in the right kind of mindsets that are cooperative and communal. And when we're missing these pieces or one or more pieces, even in later life, we can be less than optimally healthy or cooperative. So each one, I didn't leave in all my slides to describe each of these, so I will just do it orally. The soothing perinatal experience is number 1. So this means that during gestation, during pregnancy, the mother is welcoming the baby and conveying positive energy so that the biochemistry of development is a growth promoting, not growth denying. Because if the biochemistry is one of stress, then the baby's growth will be inhibited. And there's all sorts of things that can happen during pregnancy that can affect the health outcomes of the child, and there's psychology. And then part of this is birth experiences. In the United States, we have medicalized birth, which induces all sorts of trauma and interference in natural bonding and in just natural development of the brain's cooperative and healthy mechanisms. So when you separate mom and baby, when you give baby sugar water to keep them quiet, when you introduce painful procedures, you are affecting their brain development. So infant circumcision is one of these traumatic experiences. And it's only in recent years that people are realizing that babies feel pain. Wow. Before, for a longest time, it was assumed no. Then there's on-request breastfeeding, and this is quite amazing elixir of life, breast milk is. And breast milk is tailored, the mother's body tailors the milk to meet the needs of that child. So it's different milk for a boy than for a girl. It's different milk depending on the growth spurt of the child. And if there's an infectious agent in the region, the mother's breasts will produce an antibody. And the milk is needed frequently for a young baby, especially every 20 minutes on average, because it's filled with the hormones that are needed to grow the brain and the immune system. All the building blocks of the immune system are in breast milk, and the immune system takes a number of years to develop. And so in our ancestral context, the average age of stopping breastfeeding, of weaning, is 4 years old, which explodes everyone's brain. What? Are you kidding me? But that's what our bodies need and expect. And there's all sorts of longitudinal evidence that breastfeeding is vital for health and intelligence. And most of the studies that are done are comparing 3 months of breastfeeding and 3 months of infant formula rather than 4 years, right? So just think of how much smarter we could see breast milk makes you if we looked at 4 years of it. And we can see all sorts of capacities that small band hunter-gatherers have that we do not. For example, seeing the moons of Jupiter with the naked eye during the day, things like that, that people report, First Contact and other reporters tell us. Okay, number 3, positive moving touch. This means no negative touch, no corporal punishment, no spanking. We have a lot of evidence now showing that any negative touch has long-term effects on the child. For example, increasing their aggression in social relations. And then positive moving touch is what's needed to develop the brain and to develop the immune system and the vagus nerve, which is one of the key cranial nerves in the body. Then there's positive welcoming climate, a social climate that wants the child there. The child feels loved, wanted, cherished, and that child then is able to reflect that back in the community. They learn the ways of being that are positive and other enhancing. Number 5, the self-directed social play. This is not organized play like a sport. This is the freedom to run around and wrestle and climb trees with others. And it's best done with multiple aged playmates. So it's not just a same age group, because that can increase competition rather than cooperation and develops different things instead of the cooperative natural pedagogy of multiple aged living. Number 6, allo mothers. I emphasized this earlier. These are other mothers, other parents who are helping with all these needs that babies have 24/7. And allo mothers then are also providing the kinds of things the child needs: touch, play, positive climate. Even in our ancestral context, it even included breastfeeding children who are not your own children. Number 7 is the responsiveness of relationships. So it's the mother, the father, the grandmother, whoever it is around is responsive to the needs of the child, carrying them and keeping them, especially babies, keeping babies calm so that they have a good biochemistry for growing healthy in healthy ways. Nature connection is another important aspect. This is immersion in the natural world, the wild natural world ideally, and building a sense of relationship with it. And number 9, healing practices, so that these are routines you have in the ancestral communities. They have healing dances or trances or singing every week and maybe every day if there's some grieving to do. And even in the dyadic relationship mother-child, you can resynchronize when you've been dysynchronous in your communications with one another. So understanding that we get out of balance, that we get discouraged, and you don't have to stay that way. You have practices that help you get rebalanced and reconnected to feeling part of the community and part of the earth. So that's the evolved nest. And let's see. So let's go on then to the qualities that are needed to lead a species typical human life. So you want well-functioning self-regulation, immune system, stress response, intelligence. All of these things are needed to survive, but also thrive. Now, recall that, there's a lot, evolution is complicated. There's many, many things we inherit. If we just look at genes and natural selection, we need to understand that it's not enough to just reach reproduction. And then look at it's successful. And some people have argued that a 9-year-old having a baby is a sign of evolutionary success. No, they're forgetting that in order for natural selection to operate, you have to outcompete your rivals. So if you have a child raised in a very dysregulated, violent home, and you compare that child with another child in a loving, nested home, you have to not only look at their outcomes, you have to look at their descendants, the next few generations, which one outcompetes the other. So then you find out that having a less than optimal childhood actually leads to ill health in adulthood, less early death, and eventually you don't have any offspring over generations, right? So that's where evolution gets all mixed up, at least in the minds of psychologists, but what it means by natural selection. But remember again that our inheritances include the evolved nest. So if we look at what the evolved nest gets us, then what do these people look like? Really, are we really missing anything? Aren't we wonderful, we contemporary humans? Aren't we doing well, especially those of us in the top 20% of our societies? Well, let's look at the list of what we find out these people are like. And this is thriving. What does the evolved nest get us? You can see on the left side is the thriving individual, what kind of characteristics they have. On the right is how they are in relationship to others. And you can see then that the thriving individual has a quiet mind. And you'll notice that a lot of these things are what major religions advocate for, being a healthy religious person. So the Western wisdom traditions, this is where you want to get to. The Buddhist tradition, this is where you want to get to, right? And you have to work so hard as an adult in a civilized society, I think, because that nest was not provided. And so you didn't grow these things naturally. You actually come to adulthood with gaps, right? And disruption and dysregulation and despair and discouragement. And then you have to work with meditation and other practices to get back to this, right? But this is what we find in our ancestral context. Individuals with quiet minds and inner happiness, they are childlike. They are very vital and they feel and look fully alive. These characteristics are coming from observation, because you can't go in and ask questionnaires, right, about it. You don't find that out from a questionnaire. You use observation. And then you can see, let me just say, when the Dalai Lama came to the United States the first time, he said, "What is wrong with everybody?" Because there was so much lack of confidence and discouragement. Jean Liedloff, in her book, The Continuum Concept, she talks about how she spent a lot of time with the Yucana in the Amazon rainforest. And then when she went back to New York, she had the huge contrast between the two groups. In New York, everyone's face is all kind of either angry or sad or defensive. The faces, just the faces. And in the Amazon, they were happy and in full repose. So this kind of vitality, being fully alive and being open to the world, that's just part of our heritage that we have then, I argue, have undermined in various ways. So going down the list still, autonomy, so highly individualistic, but that's not, oppositional. It just means you get to decide what you're going to do now. Are you going to go hunting? No, I don't feel like it. Okay, fine. So it's a freedom that we don't experience these days. Honesty, fully honest and authentic with others. There's no defensiveness. Why would there be defensiveness if everyone else is being authentic and honest and you're here together to enhance one another? A sense of humor that's playful, outstanding memories, outstanding habit building, know-how for getting along in the landscape, an attachment to the ecology, to the local landscape, having a sense of respect for the natural world around you, and being able to perceive that it's alive, right? The sentience of the world. And these things, some of this was part of the European history until recent centuries. So it's not like we're going back to way back and going to go live in huts in the Stone Age. No, this is part of our heritage. We just forgot how to get there. And then last on the thriving individual list, connection to spirit. That we are more than our material selves, more than a body. There's more to life, that we are part of the wholeness, the reality beyond what we can see, beyond the manifest. And we undermine those capacities too by not providing the nest. All these things get undermined because we're not as smart, not as flexible, not as tuned in. In relationship, then, the list on the right, we find that everyone enjoys being with others, enhancing their well-being. Anthropologists report that when they've been with small band hunter-gatherers, they are, the anthropologists like to stay up late and type up notes or whatever, compile their notes from the day. Well, the members of the community will come in at 3 a.m, 4 a.m. when they're wake up, and then just start talking, and they assume that you want to be with other people. They assume togetherness, whereas we, of course, in the West assume aloneness, right? Because we're raised that way. So it's a very different orientation. This is one of the characteristics Darwin pointed to for our moral sense, that the social pleasure. In the United States, there are more single adult households than any other kind of household now, which would have been astounding, I think, to Darwin, and certainly to our cousins here, the hunter-gatherers. Next, they're relationally attuned and responsive. They just kind of read you and meet your needs and with joy and generosity. They have empathy, sympathy, unconditionally listen. There's no judging. They don't go into their ego the way we do, and try to see, am I better than this person? Am I, stronger, or they, all this kind of contest that we are used to in a hierarchical society. They are communally oriented, then, that corrals, fences in their autonomy. They wouldn't think of killing somebody unless they were dangerous to, had already killed a few people or something. I mean, they're just, things don't even cross their mind. So one group in Malaysia, they were asked, why didn't you fight when this other group came in? And why did you run away instead? Oh, we might have hurt them. So there's just a sense of being one and part of the whole that we see in these societies, that, you are me and I am you. Ubuntu, I am because you are. It's like we're all intertwined. So why would you hurt somebody else? Then they're authentically helpful. They demonstrate unconditional love and forgiveness. They're much more of a flow. Almost sounds like hippieville here, right? And then generosity. They expect sharing, fiercely generous in a way. Sharing is expected. Nobody goes hungry. And the Jesuits report from their diaries in the 1700s, their diaries of being in the Americas, how generous everyone was. And when they brought Native Americans to France, and the Native Americans were astounded at how cruel the society was in France, that they would let people go hungry. that there were people homeless, just vast inequalities. They couldn't fathom it. So they're fiercely egalitarian in these societies. This is something we evolved, part of that group motherhood aspect, part of what makes us distinctive from chimpanzees. And they have a respect. You can see this especially in the Native American writings and speeches, respect for ancestors and for future generations, to 7 generations ahead. Your decisions are affecting them all. And so you should be feeling responsible for those future generations, as well as the web of life. So these are the qualities that emerge from evolved nestedness. And again, the nest is especially important in the first 6 years of life, but it's also important throughout life for all of us. Let me just say a little bit about the ethics part here. So I discuss in my theory, triune ethics meta theory, discuss these kind of 3 ways the brain can have global brain states. This is based in Paul MacLean's triune brain theory, where he identified things. I mean, the details have changed because we know more about neuroscience, but these mindsets or global brain states are still evident. So we have these 3 aspects, the survival systems that we're born with, and they are these innate emotion systems of we share with all mammals: anger, fear, panic, seeking, basic lust. And then the stress response systems, the autonomic nervous system with fight, flight, freeze, faint. These are all there. And they're there so they keep us alive when we need it. And then there's the mammalian aspect. This is mostly grown. We're prepared for these emotion systems, care and play, in our deep sociality, but they have to be grown after birth. And then on the right is our more abstract thinking, the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex. These also are there, but they also have to be grown. All their interconnections have to be grown postnatally. So with good early development, the executive functions are able to control those survival systems if they get out of, if they get panicked for a moment. For example, if you see a shadow across the room and you think, oh no, it's a bear coming after me, but then you realize, oh, it's just a shadow. And your brain is working well, you can immediately shut down your panic. Now, it's not true. If you have a poorly functioning brain, your panic can go on and on and on, and you can't get over it. And we can see this in children coming to school who've been traumatized. They can't sit there and learn because they're still in the waves of panic, just being with close to other people, perhaps, and for all their various reasons. And we see then in our hunter-gatherer context that life is spent here in the heart-centered imagination. So you've got the enjoyment of others, the playfulness with others, the love and connection, and then your abstract thinking is all about, how are we going to get along, what can we decide together, the kind of things. You don't spend very much time in those survival systems. However, when the early life is toxically stressful and you're left alone, you're left to cry as a baby, you're spanked routinely or severely and so on, you're going to develop then a survival systems that are enhanced. And when they get enhanced, and when they actually, whenever your stress reaction kicks in, it takes over your brain. And for people who have undercare in early life or trauma, their stress reactivity will be on high alert most of the time, and they can't think very well. So it's going to control then those executive functions, your thinking ability or abstraction. It's going to be driven by the anger or the fear or the panic, whichever was highlighted from in your experience as a kid, as a child, and this situation then activates. So, and then what happens in early life, if you're not nested to any great degree, you're going to not even develop the capacities for play and care. There's and love. These can be, you can heal them later, but it takes a lot of work to heal, when the brain's already established patterns. It's really hard to change, as we all know. It's hard to change our habits. And so your brain gets into a habit. And you can actually have gaps in your neurons, in your systems that don't show up till adolescence or adulthood. And then suddenly you're depressed, suddenly you're anxious, suddenly you're in panic because of those gaps from the early missing experience. So this is where the ethics come in, because when you are oriented to survival, you can't think communally. You're not going to be oriented to compassion. You're going to be oriented to self-protection. So in every situation, we go either left or right here. And from the bottom up, we immediately sense whether we feel safe or unsafe. So ideally, when you have a good upbringing and you've been loved and cared for in the nested kind of way, you're going to spend most of your life on the left side here, engaged, attuned to others, oriented to approaching them and feeling rewarded with social experience and reading others exquisitely, and you're open to life. If you've had an undercare or a traumatizing early experience, you're probably going to end up being mostly on the right side. Now, all of us move in and out of these states, depending, like I said, with a bear, a shadow coming across the room, and you think it's a bear, you're going to go to the right side, right? But you can quickly rebalance once you know, right? If you have a well-functioning brain. So if people have been undercared for in early life, they're going to hang out on the right side. They're going to be in this defensive mode most of the time, and they're going to look for people to blame. Why am I feeling unsafe? It's you, because you're the wrong kind of person, or it's you because you don't think the same way I do, right? So you're oppositional. So fight flight gets mobilizes you, or you get immobilized, you just shrink away and fall apart and disappear. And these things, depending on what happened to you in early life, which one gets established. So if you're left to cry and then finally someone came when you were screaming and screaming, you probably got into the habit of screaming and being oppositional to get your needs met. If you were crying and crying in your crib alone as a baby and no one ever came, your body realized, oh, I better stop putting out all that energy or I'm going to die. You got quiet. You just went into a fainting mode or freezing mode just to stay alive. Then you might be in that kind of a habit of just disappearing when something scares you, for example. So on the right side, you're bracing against life. And all the major religions are to break this pattern, right, and put you over on the left side. So again, adults come into the monastery or other kind of religious order as adults, and they've got all those issues, right, that from that early undercare, early trauma, and then they have to learn how to dismantle all that. And some of us do that in therapy, right? But ideally, you're over on the left side, for the majority of your life and from the beginning. Now, at the top, there's also the ability to shift from one side or the other to the other, or into one side or the other, according to the stories you believe, the narratives you believe. So if your family told you green people are scary, beware of green people, when you see a green person, you're going to jump into the right side, right? Defense, even though you have no experience with it, but someone told you that and it got linked to feeling unsafe. Green equals unsafe. And so it really matters what stories we tell. It matters how we raise children, but it also matters what we tell them, what meaning we make of their lives, and our life together. So on the right is really what trauma-informed, I don't know if you've heard that term, trauma-informed practice is becoming a big thing in the United States because it's finally coming to attention that most adults have had adverse childhood experiences. And so they come into healthcare, school, other workplace, and they get easily triggered into feeling threatened because of this early experience I'm talking about. And so the people who run these organizations now realize you have to be trauma-informed. Try not to trigger people, right? So there's all this stuff about triggering now in the States. My argument is that that's good to know that, but it's also important to be wellness informed. So all the stuff I've been talking about is about how to get to wellness, how to get to thriving, not just avoid more trauma, right? How to avoid the trauma completely from the beginning and how to reach thriving. So for me, the trauma informed is sort of reminds me of resilience. You didn't drop out of secondary school. Oh, you didn't get pregnant when you were an adolescent. Ah, success. Well, that's not success, really. That's just getting back to kind of zero. But success is reaching your optimal performance as a human being, your unique gifts. So that's getting to 100, right? So on the right, we're getting back to zero. On the left, we're getting to whatever 100 you're the top of your capacities. All right, so I'm saying there are two gaps then to fill for human phronesis. We need to fill that bottom gap to understand that we have basic needs and they need to be provided for through the evolved nest. And that's going to lead to thriving. And then along the way, when things go wrong, you have the healing practices, right, to get back in balance. And then the top gap is what I want to talk about next, which is the capacities beyond what I've already mentioned. What have we forgotten or underdeveloped or undermined? So these are the third aspect of Foote's argument. What are the capacities that make humans a proper member of the species? As Aristotle said, a person who fully realizes the potential of human nature. So let's look at that top gap. This is what we can see, what I call transrationality in our ancestral context. This is when we're bonded to, cooperative with our landscapes. We feel integrated with the natural world. I'll speak as if we are that way. We live as if all of nature is alive, sentient, inanimate. This was common in the whole world until a few centuries ago, right? Our senses are tuned in to receiving the personhood of the other than human, the non-human, that we can actually perceive their communications. What? This sounds crazy to a Western ego-oriented, left brain dominated culture or attitude, right? So I know it sounds out there, but this is what we know. And then their appetites are controlled and you're oriented to sustaining the bio community's well-being. You rely on the well-being of everyone else. So why would you be destructive, right? Your rationality then is rooted in living on the earth according to its laws, not against them, which again is the opposite of the last few hundred years. And then to be fully human means to be communal and earth respecting and part of the partnership of life. You're not superior, you're not inferior, you have your role, right? And you're part of the partnership community. And I made this list yesterday on the 4E cognition. This is cognitive science thing now to talk about embedded, embodied, enacted, and extended cognition instead of just, what's talking about cognition is one thing, right? So in our evolved nested community, this is what I see as embedded. Your autonomy is there, but also your connection to an attachment to community of people and other than humans. In the industrialized society, there's lots of disconnection. You're unattached, alienated. There's just a lack of autonomy in comparison. Embodiment is regulated. You're regulated, self-regulated. You're confident. You're thriving. And then the opposite on the other side, industrial societies kind of disembodied us, right? And then enacted. We have skilled sociality, skilled social enhancement, know-how. Whereas on the right, our enacted practical wisdom or understanding of things is technological and we're oriented to exterminating things. You're in my way, spider, boom, right? Get out of here. Our domination, we're in charge of the earth. We're going to make it all happen and change all the landscape and so on. And then the extended, in the ancestral context, it's spiritual and receptive intelligences are grown. Whereas in the industrialized society, it's really technological extension, the extended mind. So this is Andy Clark. So there's really a lack of spiritual and receptive intelligence, unless you fall outside the norms, right? And overall, I'm getting close to the end here. Overall, we have two worldviews or cosmologies that are have been, well, are conflicting now. The dominant culture on the left from the 17th century has had these characteristics, right? Only humans have spirit, only humans matter. Humans are the best, the pinnacle, whether it's creation or evolution. And then we're restless and homeless. We want to conform the landscape to our ideals in our heads, right? And we hoard things because we don't feel like there's ever enough. And that's the fragmented, disenchanted, amoral cosmos view. And then on the right side is what we're calling indigenous perspective, indigenous worldview, indigenous cosmology, where you understand spirit pervades all things. Mutual relatedness is part of the way the world works. We're the younger siblings with much to learn from the trees and the animals and plants and rivers. And we are placeful. This is our home. And we learn to fit in with the local landscape and bio-community, and we share with them. So the ethic then behind all this is that expressed by Aldo Leopold, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. So what we've forgotten here then is our wellness-informed pathway. The top, I guess I have the bottom and top mixed here, but the bottom gap is meeting basic needs, fostering thriving, right? We got to start there. And then where we end up is we end up with heart-mindedness and earth-centered living know-how. And so I have lots more information everywhere. If we had time, we'd watch this film. It's only 6 minutes long, has Italian subtitles. I urge you to please watch it because it gives you the big picture of the two cycles, the cycle of cooperative companionship, our heritage, and the one we're in, the cycle of competitive detachment. And lots of stuff for public consumption here and for academics and so on. And so I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
I
very
propose that you show us the 6 minutes film if you think that's useful for discussion.
Oh, yes. Okay, let me find it while people are thinking about their questions. And you could write in the chat, I think, right? Or
yeah, maybe it's going to be better if they raise their hands rather than writing in the chat, so I can keep track of the hands and give the word to people.
All right.
I mean, yeah, feel free to raise your hand already when you're ready, and while we watch the film.
Okay, I'm going to, should I put the Italian subtitles?
Or English?
English is okay? Okay. Here we go.
We've been told a story that we are selfish, aggressive, rugged individuals. But if that were true, we should have no problem with physical distancing and self-isolation. The pandemic showed us that this story is not who we are. That's because we evolved in cooperative bands of kin and non-kin, where we were nurtured and welcomed by all members of the community. We lived together, we gathered food together, we sang together, and we danced together. We knew it would have been impossible to survive on our own. But together, we thrived. Today, we are living in a culture that goes against everything it means to be human. Our culture emphasizes toughness over tenderness, isolation instead of togetherness, even for babies. As a result, we are depressed, anxious, chronically ill, and at the bottom of every international indicator for health. We are stuck in a cycle of competitive detachment where we feel disconnected from others and even ourselves, while at the same time feeling we have to compete for anything worthwhile. There's a way not only to break this cycle, but to create a new one. one that reclaims our humanity and helps us heal ourselves in our culture. We can create a cycle of connected, cooperative companionship. For most of our existence, we have created culture from the bottom up, from the way we raise children, and from the top down, from the stories we told one another. Children were nested in loving, supportive village care, growing deep connections to and respect for the natural world. In modern culture, children are raised with disconnection, with little concern for their basic needs, and with an almost random set of relational experiences. They still hear stories conveyed by various media, but they are full of put-downs, egoism, and violence. Babies require an external womb experience to grow and connect with others. They need calming, affectionate care, immediate responses to keep them optimally aroused while rapidly growing brain connections. Without this early care, without meeting our millions-year-old biological needs for our evolved nest, babies learn a pattern of disconnection from the self, from others, and from the world, manifesting in self-protective mindsets and irritation with people from different backgrounds or with different ideas. We withdraw from social life because it's just too painful, triggering the traumas we experienced early on in life. We constantly seek to fill a void we were never biologically intended to experience. The good news is that it's possible to break this cycle of competitive detachment and restore the cycles of connected, cooperative companionship. We can learn what our basic needs are and find ways to help everyone get them met. We can take steps that open our minds and hearts and build empathy towards others who are different from us. We can become aware and careful about where we put our greatest asset, our attention. We can build attachment to the natural world by immersing ourselves in its beauty and developing our connection with its aliveness. Cultures can and do change. It begins with each one of us realizing our inherent nature to be empathic, flexible, and sovereign beings, followed by taking steps to heal and restore our core nature. Many of us assume that the culture we live in mirrors innate human nature, but today's dominant cultures of competitive, destructive detachment are rare and recent. Nearly every other culture that has ever existed during our species' history over millions of years has been one of connected, cooperative companionship. To heal ourselves and our world, we simply must return to this way of nurturing children and communities. For more information, go to breakingthecyclefilm.org.
Thank you very much, Darcia.
Yeah.
So I have already 5 hands up. I would suggest that everyone asks one question, so we make sure that everyone has the chance to ask their question. And if someone has more than one question, then they'll raise their hands again and I'll put them in the list. So I guess Michele was first.
Yes, thank you, Darcia, for your stimulating presentation. And the movie, the short movie was very nice. Unfortunately, the subtitles in Arabic were not really helpful to let us
Someone
understand.
at YouTube must have turned that on.
Oh no, I wasn't.
No.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. The movie was nice anyway, even with those subtitles. I share entirely the kind of approach that you have, and of course, I agree with being on the thriving side and all that we should do to improve the especially the education for our young generations in that direction. And what you say at the end that concerns mainly environmental ethics and bringing in Aldo Leopold, I share also that part, because and probably much more should be done on the side of environmental virtue ethics, which is a part of environmental ethics which is fast developing in these last years, and it is something that goes entirely in your direction. I only have a little question that can be synthesized in a name, that is Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is the famous character by Charles Dickens, and he seems to represent a counterexample to what you have been holding all over the presentation. That is a kind of person who, although being through all sorts of hardships in his life as a child, still has potentialities to become a good person. So the question is that only a fantasy character by Charles Dickens, or can we imagine that there is a room for some exceptions, as in his case?
Right. I discuss Oliver Twist, or I mention him in my neurobiology book as an example of how the belief used to be that you inherited, it was in your blood to be a gentleman or a thief. Yeah. So, and then I say Harry Potter is a different example where that early experience of love in that first year of his life really made the difference. But what I'm arguing for is optimal, right? Optimal functioning at the highest level. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't, reach part way there, even though you didn't have the good early experience. It just takes so much work, and I'm not sure, we don't know. Can you really fix your immune system? Can you fix your serotonin system without drugs, for example? Or without 8 hours of meditation a day? We just don't know that you can get back to being on the healthiest trajectory. But there's a lot you can do still, even if, and we know from the research on resilience, the protective factors for young people are to have one adult who loves you. That helps you stay away from risky behaviors in adolescence, for example, or being attractive or being intelligent. Somehow there's certain factors you can have that get you into the mainstream, right? My argument, though, is we have to move beyond what's, mainstream and adequate. We need all our potential now. We are destroying the planet because we haven't been connected to our potential. We haven't joined together with our potentials in our imaginations. So I also have a spiritual aspect to this, that we have a lot of power by the way we think and understand things. So I tap into the physicists, quantum mechanics, David Bohm, that it matters that you understand you're in a dynamic universe and what you do now is shaping the future. So I think we all have potential, and we just need to nurture everyone to reach their potential, however we are. So if we find out we were under nurtured when we were an adult, we found out later, well, there's things you can do to heal, and there's a lot of different practices you can take up.
Okay, thank you.
Mario?
Thank you very much, Darcia. A lot to think about. I have a question. So you, of course, I have a question because I raised my hand. And you pointed to the fact that, biology is certainly fundamental here. for the development of human beings, but also the social life, our interactions with the others shape who we are. Now, my question is, what about our own rationality, the individual's will, so autonomy? What's the role of these traditional components of the folk psychology and folk philosophy view of the world, in which we are not only the result of the forces of the external world, be it the biological or the physical world or the social environment. So it's important, especially from the point of view of virtue ethics, because of the role that phronesis supposedly plays, right? So my question is, what the role of our own conscious will in shaping who we are?
Yeah, this is something that is integrated. And if we take, you can see more of this in the Native American literature of the importance of the adults following that unique spirit of the child to see what their gifts are, and then providing the experiences to shape and improve those gifts, and encouraging them always to aim for virtue, aim for being respectful to whatever creatures and landscape you have, and to find out what in a way, your will, your purpose with vision quests, right? So it's much more of a holistic orientation to child development that then encourages you to use your will for your purpose and to take up the self-development that's required to fulfill your purpose. And so reasoning and is then used when there are problems. So in one of my chapters or articles published, I talk about the missing mind and based on David Bohm and Marvin Bram, who is a historian, and what they say used to be common capacities before civilization, which is this de-differentiating capacity to find yourself kind of in flow, and there's no solid identity, more integrated with others. And that's a polysemic or polymorphic kind of orientation. But it doesn't mean, and it's very right brain dominated, it's more integrated brain, I suppose. But it doesn't mean you don't use reasoning. You use reasoning for problem solving when needed. But all the major religions of the world have said, beware of intellect. Don't hang out there too long because it's dangerous. You start to think you're a thinker. It's good for problem solving in the immediate term, right? And I talk about using it as part of communal imagination. So I think there sort of has to be a reset. I'm oriented to the embodied holistic virtue, that reasoning is used, as a sometimes when needed, but you want a bottom up virtue, not the top down. Although, like I've been saying, the adults come dysregulated and they want to be wise, and then they have to do the top down thing. They have to practice the Ignatius spiritual exercises. They have to do all these things to try to dismantle and re-regulate the things that didn't get regulated. So I think for us, we think reasoning and will is necessary, which is remind me of Kant when we come back to this. We think it's necessary in part because we don't have the bottom-up development that our ancestors or cousins have. So Kant was oriented to heteronomy for children, right? You got to teach children to obey adults. And then later on, they can choose to obey the law, right? They'll have autonomy later. And this is very upside down in the Native American tradition. You don't break the child's spirit. You don't coerce them. You don't force them into something, because you can break them forever. You will ruin their life. But we think that's normal, to coerce children, to put them into this whatever factory lineup of how to become an obedient citizen. So I think there's stuff to work out here that I still need to work out, but at least I give you a few ideas.
Thank you very much.
So I have Julio or Julio. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. We can hear you. We can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, let's stick to the simple fact that you stated that primitive people can discern the moons of Jupiter in plain daylight. Let's compare the visual magnitude for those who don't know what it is. It suffices to know that's a logarithmic scale of the sun. It's a reverse logarithmic scale of the sun. It's -27. Of Jupiter, it's -3. And Ganymede, it's +5. Therefore, discerning Jupiter and its moons in daylight with naked eyes is fake news. Fake news to a degree that has absolutely no chance of being truth. No? It's pure wishful thinking. And would that be that's my conclusion? Would that be my excessive attachment to rational thinking, or is there any other explanation?
That's a good comment. I was just throwing that out from one of the anthropologists reporting that. So there are better examples than that. It is hard to believe. Another one is they could hear a motor of a plane 70 miles away. We do know there. The point was just to understand that our sensory systems could be better than they are now. Now, there's a bunch of reasons probably why we don't have very good senses in comparison, because we spend so much time inside. We're not outside in a jungle, for example, to be able to hear the different things that people who live there hear, we don't hear. So it's probably a bad example. I won't use it again, but it was reported. Thank you.
So now I have Georgia.
Hi, can you hear me? I guess so. Hi, my name is Georgia. I am a PhD student at the European University of Rome. So first I introduce myself, and I would like to thank you for the enlightening presentation. And my question is, how can we regain and rebuild those characteristics, the characteristics of a thriving individual? I mean, that we have lost over time, over the course of time. I mean, how can we develop a sense of connection with the world? And how can we feel and want to feel more connected with others? I mean, this is the only way of living that we have ever known. And we are in constant detachment, but without realizing it. So that's my question, I think.
Just a little question, huh?
Yeah, tough question, I know.
Well, these are things that at evolveness.org we have different tools to use. So for people, for example, who feel anxious or depressed, we have 28 days of self-calming based on a research study we published a couple years ago, where we had one little thing for students to do every day for 3 weeks to try to build their nature connection. And it worked. So we've put that into a 28 days, anybody can do, sign up for that. We also have a 28 days of what we call eco-attach. Well, that's called eco-attach. I'm sorry, I'm mixing my things up. So what we did is we aimed for nature connection. We call that eco-attachment dance. That was published. We also have self-calming, which is based on various research practices, 28 days of that for the anxious people. So if you feel disconnected from nature, then there's these little things you can do. And there's a lot of websites now that help you with that part. And people like Wendell Berry, the poet and activist, has said that we know that we need to do something about the environment, and we know we're doing things badly, but we've been talking about that for decades and it's getting worse, right? And so he argues we have to get back to feeling connected, right, and attached and caring for it. So that's why we're focused on that. There's various ways, even if you're in pandemic isolation. On my last semester of teaching, we went into the pandemic forced home isolation midway through the semester. And that was when we were supposed to start sitting outside and doing all sorts of nature connection activities with kindergarten students, young children. And that couldn't happen then. They had people in Singapore, Colombia, students. And so they had to figure out what to do where they were for nature connection. They couldn't go outside perhaps, and they're in an apartment building, but they had a balcony with plants, right? And things like that. So there are things to do, but it takes, some reasoning, some planning, some calculation of our intellect. Using that for these purposes is good. And I think in the United States, I think we're probably the worst off of the advanced nations for children. It's not the worst place to raise a child. There's no parental leave. We need to provide that paid leave for mothers and fathers so they can stay home and really bond with the child and give the child the evolved nest, as I've explained it. And we need to educate the parents and the adults about what children need. We still have parents who spank their children and they're only age 1. That is misdirecting development, right? Or they think, oh, they should know better when they're age 2. They should know better how to behave. No, they don't. So there's a lot of misunderstanding, and that you don't want to spoil the baby, don't give them too much attention. Again, that's the opposite kind of, the way you get and tantrums are normal for 2-year-olds to scream. No, that's not normal either. Again, it's from this misguided treatment of babies mostly. So I'm a baby advocate because people seem to think babies are like children, and they're very much not. So I think there's a lot of levels. I didn't show my PowerPoint slide where I say we can intervene at every level. So in the early experience, we can help mothers be responsive. They need to feel supported. Families need to feel supported in order to be open and open-hearted to their children. And then we need to help children when they come to school to calm down and to find, to use their planning mind to help them realize when they're getting anxious and to deep belly breathe. I taught my undergraduate college students to breathe, belly breathe. And then the adults need the healing too, and we can help each other. We can be positive and integrative and welcoming and communal with everybody and find that they're just part of us. They just, even if they're doing something that's annoying, to find a way to bring them into the circle of connection. And then to work on our culture. We're very oriented to money making and to controlling the natural world, and that's giving us the end of the world, really, for our species. If we don't do something, we're on the cliff edge right now, right? So anyway, I'm sorry, that's a huge question. We could take a few months to talk about it and find all sorts of resources for you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to steal time from other questions, but thank you. Absolutely interesting about all the levels from a systemic point of view. So how can we help mothers and fathers and build a system that can support the correct development of humans? And from the other side, we have all the trainings that we can employ when we have the damage. So when we are adults. And so thank you. And
you start with yourself. Make sure you're calm. And each of us can do this. Make sure we're calm and that we're in a state of open-heartedness. So develop the heart mind rather than staying up here and detached or controlling, right? So you want to come into your heart, and that takes some time to relax into that. And then, the paths open up when your attitude, your mood, your orientation is different. And even that, we're bodies of energy. So we're sending out waves of energy. If we're mad, and oh, those people, we're sending out that wave, and we're, making that grow instead of the more open-hearted and connected spirit.
Thank you.
So typically we end here, but I have 3 more questions if Darcia is okay with that, and
Sure.
and 3 questions must be as short as possible. Ilaria, you're next.
Hi, so I'm Ilaria Galasso. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University College Dublin, and thank you very much. Your talk was really interesting. It was a very interesting lecture. In particular, I was curious about the effect that epigenetics might have on intellectual capacities on human being. I mean, effects of epigenetics other than the effects that it can have on health. I was wondering whether there are any studies about the correlation between epigenetics and intellectual capacities of adults. And in relation to this, I also like to ask, given that it is so important that children are nurtured and nested in the correct way because of so many reasons, I was wondering what the society can do in that respect, because children nurturing is something that is very dependent on the parents or on the community. What can the society and the institutions do to make sure that the parents have the skills, the capacities, and also the means to nest children in the correct way? Thank you very much.
In terms of the epigenetics on intelligence, I was pointing to some of it in terms of social emotional intelligence, right? So that if you're stressed, your energy, your blood flow is going to your muscles if you're in the stress response, and you're not going to think very well. And so it's going to undermine your capacities. You will see affordances, your intellectual affordances will be for self-protection. You will look to find ways to make yourself feel safe. So you're not as open intellectually as you would hopefully be normally. So epigenetics is still a new area. And so we can see it's easier to study health effects in rats, for example, than the way they're thinking. So most of the epigenetics work is on health outcomes. And even with the human studies, that's still easier, right? You can see if your grandparents were in the Holocaust or in a starvation, that affects you as a grandchild in various ways. And it's so hard to then imagine, to study the intellectual aspects. So I'm focused on the social emotional intelligence. And yeah, so that's what I was aiming at. In terms of child nurturing, I think, again, we mentioned education for parents. They need to really understand who we are. We are really very plastic as babies, and how babies are treated is how they're going to become in so many different ways. So, and it's so complicated, right? Every child's different. So I think education for parents, but also support for a multi-generational way of living. But then you have to have the grandparents educated as well, because sometimes it's the grandparents who are telling the parents, oh, let the baby cry, you'll spoil the baby, right? Or something like that. So it's like a multiple generation education, multiple generation living, setting up schools to be cross age, so that they feel motivated and cooperative rather than competitive with the same age group. So there's a bunch of things that need to be done. Politicians need to have policies that support the families so that they can relax together. So that means good wages, one job. In the United States, all this stuff is missing, you know. Healthcare, we don't have good healthcare, and you can become bankrupt from having being sick with something. And so there's a lot of things to do. I hope I gave you a couple ideas anyway.
Thanks.
Matteo?
Yeah, I'd like to ask something about the role of the role you created to the context. So at the beginning, I was impressed by the fact that you created a lot to the, so that to the fact that social interaction shapes children's brain and response and so on, creates habits and so on. I was thinking that this is going in the direction of explaining the flexibility of our response to social framework. So different, say, institutional framework can elicit very different virtues. So it's not the same. So virtues that are apt to a hunter-gatherer are not the same to the virtues which are apt to the medieval warlord or to a contemporary, say, computer scientist. But at the end, the big picture you designed looked at, on the contrary, quite rigid. So basically, after agriculture 10,000 years ago, we are alienated because we are wrongly responding to the environment, so to say. So, and at the end, in the big picture, there seems to be a right answer, a right way to be raised or to be socialized, which is more or less so before agriculture, and a wronger way that drive us to alienation, detachment, and so on, which is all what comes after agriculture. So I'm wondering, how do you square the flexibility you created to the, say, human brain or biosocial context in which human brains develop, and at least seemingly rigid picture you have at the end.
There's a new book by David Graeber and David Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything.
Yeah.
There's some problems with it, but one of the things that's helpful is that it shows that we're not on a progressive linear, evolution of social political systems, right? So the hunter-gatherers of the past sometimes were in huge, large communities half the year, and then they would go back to the egalitarian bands. So I think that we have to, maybe I misspoke, but have to not attribute history to this linear orientation, but we are more flexible than that. In terms of the virtue flexibility, so I didn't emphasize how in all societies that provide the nest, they are very different. They have different cultures, they have different beliefs, they have different ways of living, they orient to their landscape, but they have this common nest, right? So I'm trying to emphasize the nest is going to lead to the flexibility of intelligence, of getting along. And the civilized way can be, I mean, if you keep the nest going within a hierarchical organization, and some maybe do, then it's good. My critique is that we have created orientations, mindsets, and lack of capacities that are leading us to the disasters we have now. I'm trying to figure out why we're so destructive, right? And so that's my point, is that we've lost that early stuff. We've lost the capacities at the end, and we need to bring them back. But it doesn't mean a rigid, I don't mean to be, well, it's rigid in terms of providing the nest, but all that, what that looks like varies by culture and society. So I don't know if I'm answering your question though very well, Matteo. Do you want to say something else, or is that?
No, yeah, I had something in mind, like Graeber books actually. But that I see, I understand the answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Filippo, it's your turn.
Yeah, super quickly. I'm just wondering. I mean, this has been raised in the chat earlier, I guess, by Giulio as well. But so I wonder. I'm okay with the isolation thing. I mean, it's obvious that there's more isolation in weird societies than in hunter-gatherer societies, and I can see the reasons. So economic growth and cultural reasons, technological reasons, all sorts of things like that. I'm not sure about the increase in violence and the increase in in-group, out-group sort of tendencies. Maybe you were not arguing for that, but if you are arguing for that, what would the likely cause behind that kind of societal shift in weird countries? Because if anything, I see kind of some signs of going back, right? So for example, anti-racism, globalization, all those things, they seem to go in different directions. A decrease in actual physical violence in weird countries, they seem to go in the other direction. So I just wondered, what is the historical reasons for that part of the movement that you're seems to be describing? Maybe I'm wrong that you are describing that.
Well, I think I was thinking about John Haidt's argument that humans have those 5 or 6 foundations, and one of them is in-group, out-group. That's part of being a human being. And so my argument is, no, that's shaped. That's epigenetic. Just like orientation to authoritarianism is epigenetic. It's not part of us, right? It's and so I argue with his framing, but he says it's just and then the people who emphasize that we're like chimpanzees, they're saying, oh, we're dominance oriented and we're in-group, out-group oriented. There are anthropologists who say that. So I'm arguing against them, essentially. Now, and my argument is that when you undercare for kids, you're pushing them, you're leaning them towards those less than helpful orientations, because that's what survival systems do when you enhance them. Now, thankfully, we have, this is where the intellect is good. The young people especially are saying, no, there's something wrong with this, right? Of the, Black lives do matter. And so I think we are more complex than what I've said, right? I'm telling you my little pieces that I've put together. But I think there's a lot of hope that we can use our minds in a way that actually guide us back to being communal in a broad sense. And I think that those movements that you mentioned are part of that. So I don't mean to establish walls and rigidity. We are more flexible than that. Did I answer your question, Filippo? Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'd say thanks a lot, everyone, for the nice Q&A session as well. Thanks a lot, Darcia, obviously. And I mean, just random clapping hands before leaving. I just wanted to remind you that the next meeting will be in February 11th, and Professor Dan Lapsley from University of Notre Dame will be our guest speaker. So I'll welcome you there and wish you a good weekend. Thanks, Darcia. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Thank you to you all.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Bye.